Well, good to see everybody this morning.
Good to see you.
We have a lot of folks out sick. We need to remember, but some are back. We appreciate it if those are able to be back with us. So let's remember them. We're in Matthew chapter 14 this morning. Matthew chapter 14. And we'll start reading this morning. We'll read the first 12 verses, then we'll get into that part of the study. So it says, at that time Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus and said to his servants, this is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead. Therefore these powers are at work in him. For Herod had laid hold of John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had said to him, it is not lawful for you to have her. And although he wanted to put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Therefore he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. So she, having been prompted by her mother, said, give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter. And the king was sorry. Nevertheless, because of the oath and because of those who sat with him, he commanded it to be given to her. So he sent and had John beheaded in prison. And his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. Then his disciples came and took away the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. So this is Herod the Tetrarch, who would actually be the son of Herod the Great. And if you remember, Herod the Great was the one who wanted to have Jesus killed when he was born. He's the one that the wise men had come through, and he said, tell me where he's born. And so this was that family, and any of the leaders at that time, they were known as the Herodias family, if you will. But this was the son. So why do you think, when he heard about Jesus, he said, this is John the Baptist risen from the dead? He said he didn't acknowledge this was Jesus. He thought this was John who had risen from the dead. I think that's one of I think there's two reasons. One of them is, I think he did feel guilty. That he had John beheaded, because it said he'd risen from the dead because he's the one who had him killed. But also there was a belief back then among the people at that time, and that the soul, once a man died, that soul didn't leave the earth. It moved on to the body of another person. So they believed that this could have been John. His soul was just in the body of whoever this was. So he said that's why he believed this was John that had come back from the dead. And the name for that is transmigration. That was the belief system back then. That the soul was just transferred to another body instead of moving on. So he thought this was John the Baptist come back from the dead. And I do believe there was some guilt there, because I think if it hadn't been for Herodias, he probably would not have killed John. He would not have had him killed. But so that's why he thought this was John come back from the dead. And who knows, he might not have wanted to acknowledge this was Jesus. Because Jesus had so many followers after him, he may not have wanted to acknowledge, hey, this is that Jesus the Christ that had come. So the rest of this reading is about poor John being beheaded. He had been thrown into prison for what reason? He spoke against, so Herod had taken his brother Philip's wife while his brother Philip was still alive. He was still living, so he had his brother's wife, and he said it's not lawful for you to have her. And he spoke out against him, and he didn't like that. If you go over and read Mark's account in chapter 6, he puts more of the blame on Herodias, even though in here it says he put John in prison for the sake of Herodias. She got madder about it than Herod did. And she's the one that wanted to have him put into prison. And it says, for her sake, he put John in prison. And she wanted him killed. She wanted him put to death. But because of his followers, the multitude of his followers, and that he was afraid to do it because of the repercussions that might come to him. So instead of that, he just put him into prison where he was still there then. So here his birthday comes. I think it's interesting that Herod threw himself a birthday party. I think that's interesting. Usually when you have a birthday party, somebody else throws you a birthday party. But I think this kind of shows the arrogance. I think the arrogance and that of the power that he had. And so he threw himself a party, a birthday party. I guess you have to if nobody else will do it, don't you? Yeah. Do you invite people to your own birthday parties? Yeah, the ones you want there, yeah. Yeah. The ones that might bring you some money or a present, that's the one you invite. But so he has this party. So Herodias, who is the daughter here, so let me get my name straight here. The daughter of Herodias danced. They never named her. The daughter of Herodias danced for him. So she would have been his niece, right? Huh? Well, niece or stepdaughter, because it would have been two ways there. Stepdaughter and would have been his niece because it was Philip's. We assume this was Philip's daughter, his brother's daughter, that danced for him. And some of the commentaries I read said this would have been a lewd dance. This would not have been just a normal dance, but this was an enticing dance that she did for them. And it pleased them to the point that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she'd ask. And in another account, it says that he offered to give her up to half his kingdom. So this must have been some kind of dance. That's all I can say. But so you think, so he offers this. So what does she then do? This was interesting to me. She goes to her mother.
That kind of makes you think what her age must have been.
Yeah, we don't know what age she was, but maybe this was pre-planned also. Maybe Herodias knew that if she danced and pleased them, that he would make her some promise or whatever it might have been. And she says, hey, if he promises you something, you come and let's talk about it. But for whatever reason, she goes to her mother and asks. And so he goes, she said, give me John the Baptist's head on a platter. And a platter, from what I read here, we think of a platter as being a flat plate. It would have, back at this time, it would have been a bowl. It would have been a large bowl that they would have brought his head in. So can you imagine his thought process? It says he was sorry. But imagine when she comes to him and she says, I want John the Baptist's head on a platter. It says he was sorry and now he'd even promised this. But he had to carry it out. And why did he have to carry it out? He had made an oath. It's interesting the way it's written here, because it said he was sorry, but because of the oath and because of those who sat with them. In other words, if he'd have made this oath and nobody heard it, he might not have done it. But because everybody there heard this oath he had made to her, he had to carry it out. And so they carry this out. He goes in, has John beheaded in prison, and then his head is brought out.
Well, it's peer pressure, like children have it, well, everybody has now. It's good stuff, you said you'd do it, and that aggravation until you did it. He didn't really want to do this.
It says he was sorry, but nevertheless, because of what he promised and all that. But he has John beheaded, his head's brought out in a platter and given to the girl, and then she brings it to the mother.
That's just gross.
So what do we learn from this? Don't make a promise that you might not want to keep. Do not make a woman mad. That's a great lesson here. Don't make a woman mad. But we see here nobody likes to be told they're wrong, do they? And all of this came about to John, all because he told them, even under the old law, it was wrong for Herod to take his brother's wife. It was wrong. Obviously, nobody else had been willing to tell him, hey, you're in the wrong. And so, now that he does that, they didn't want to hear it because he called them out, and that anger had to become hate, because if it doesn't become, this is evil. You think about this is just plain evil. But because of that, he is now beheaded. And so the disciples came, they took his body and they buried the body. And then they went and told Jesus. Why do you think they told Jesus? He would have wanted to know, because think about this relationship. John was the front runner for Jesus. He was a cousin. He was also kin to him. He was his cousin. And think about all the teachings. He had also baptized Jesus. So everybody knew this relationship between John. Not only were they kin to each other, but also this relationship they had spiritually with each other. And that John was a forerunner. They had this relationship. So he goes to tell Jesus about it. Go ahead, Aaron.
One other thing, I think a lesson can be learned from this. In this life, we question God when terrible things happen to maybe our family or someone that is a very good person, and we question God, right? And here he is, the forerunner of Christ. He allowed this to happen. God did. So I think we can kind of take and look at this, and then earlier on, look what happened to Stephen.
Yeah.
So there's two instances right there, two holy people that he allowed to be sacrificed.
To be martyred. And think about all of his apostles.
Right.
Were martyred. And if you think about it, we read, over in Psalms, we read where David wrote about why does evil exist? Why does God allow evil to exist? And in our minds, we do think that way. It's like, why does this happen? Well, it all happened because evil does exist. And evil is allowed to exist until the end of time.
I think sometimes it even affects our faith.
If we're not careful.
It could.
Yeah. If we're not careful, it can affect, because we think when God made us free moral agents, we had a choice between good and evil. You think about Adam and Eve. In their heart, they were made good, but they had an ability to make up their own decision. So Satan comes in. What does Satan do? He deceives them. And he deceives them into doing sinful things, evil that God told them not to do. And ever since that point, man has had good and evil in his heart. There's a battle, and even Paul wrote about this internal battle we have of, are we going to do the right thing or the wrong thing? The thing we know to do, we're not doing that. He wrote and says, what I know I should be doing, I'm not doing, and what I not do, I do that. And he said, he even said, what a terrible man I am. But that's this internal battle that we have. And I think one of the things we're prompted, like you said, I think some of these things are trials for us. They are trials because there's evil out there, and evil overcomes good many times, and we don't understand it. But it's there, and God has allowed it. I think one of the things that from our study of Revelation, I think we can learn is, remember in study of Revelation where it says the devil will have his way for a period of time on the earth? And while he's got his period of time on the earth, what is he doing? He's walking around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He's tempting. He's trying to get us to do the evil thing. And that's why all this evil is out there. It's Satan that's deceiving people. And we have a choice. We're either going to choose to do good and do right as God has us to do, or we're going to do evil. And this is what happened. They had chosen to sin. I mean, you think about it, they had chosen to come together. They knew, did they know it was wrong for them to be together? Absolutely. They knew it was wrong. They just didn't like it because John called them out. That was what they didn't like about it.
I don't know, maybe you can tell me, was Herod a Jew or was he a Gentile?
I would think he would be a Jew.
Do you think so?
I would think so. I think
know
so.
he was appointed by Rome.
Yeah. So he would have been over that area appointed by Rome. I think he would have been a Jew at this time, because that was part of that belief they had of the soul leaving another part of some of the Jewish belief system. But you think about, we think about poor John. He was just pointing out right and wrong. But what happens to people today when they do that? You get in trouble, don't you? People don't want to, you go to somebody and say, hey, you're not doing the right thing here. Most people's reaction is not going to be positive.
But I think what John did to Herod is the worst situation that you can straighten out.
Right. Somebody did in that situation. It's hard, absolutely. But here's the hard thing, and this, I think this is why how you go to people today is so important. In Galatians chapter 6, it says, if a brother is overtaken in a fault, you who are spiritual go and restore them, bring them back in a spirit of what? Meekness and love, in case you're tempted by it. In other words, if I go calling them out and screaming at them and saying, you approach it the wrong way, you're going to get a bad reaction. But if you approach it in love and concern for that person, as he tells us to do, I think you can get a positive reaction. Now, I don't mean they're going to change and do what you want, but I think they'll see that you're doing it for the right reason. You're not just doing it in an arrogant way or that kind of thing. But nobody likes to be called out, and because of that, poor John, he gets beheaded here. But there again, who wins out in the end? John. Because John's going to be the one that wins in the end. There again, I'll go back to the Revelation study. We're at the end of Revelation now, and who's winning out in the end? God and the followers of Christ. That's who's winning out in the end, and that's who's going to win out in the end in this as well. So let's go to 13 through 21 in the feeding of the 5,000. So it says, when Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. Now I think this is an interesting thing. We'll discuss it a little further. But he goes to be by himself once he hears it. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them, and healed their sick. When it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, this is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food. But Jesus said to them, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. And they said to him, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. He said, bring them here to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So this is probably one of the most notable miracles that people know about that Jesus did. And that was feeding the 5,000 plus. We always call it the feeding 5,000, but we really don't know how many it was, do we? Because it said it was 5,000 men besides women and children. So there were way more than 5,000. But so he feeds them. I think it's interesting, his reaction to John's death, I think, it is one of sorrow here, because what does he do immediately? He goes to be by himself. He goes into it by himself. And usually when Jesus went to be by himself, what did he go to do? To pray. Many times he went by himself to pray. And I'm sure in this case it probably was the same. He wanted to be alone and by himself. But even when he went to be by himself, the crowds followed him. And I think that shows us how great his name had become there, how great his fame had become, in the fact that the multitude were just following him wherever he went. So it says he came out of this desert place, whatever it was, and he saw them, these great multitudes, and it said he had compassion on them. He had this great compassion for them, and he goes out, and it's interesting, he didn't go out and start teaching them. What did he do? He went out and started healing their sick. And remember, many of these people were following him because he was healing people and casting out demons and all these things he was doing. So he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. And so here it starts to get late, and his disciples come to him and said, hey, it's getting late. We need to, they were too far away for people to go get food quickly. So he said, it's getting late. Let's send them in to get food. And he throws them a challenge. He says, do what? You give them something to eat. Now, did Jesus know what they had there? Why would he say you feed them? I thought this was interesting when he says, you give them something to eat. They don't have to go anywhere. You give them something to eat.
He knows they knew they didn't have enough food.
They couldn't do it. And I think he's going to prove the power of this miracle to them. That they knew there was not enough food there. So they come up with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, John's account tells us that there was a small lad there that had this. In other words, this wasn't even food that the disciples had. They didn't have food with them. So they came up, this young boy had these 5 loaves and 2 fish. What kind of fish do you think they were?
Eating kind.
Huh? The eating kind.
kind.
Yeah, the eating kind. But so here he has this, and so when they bring him this food, and they say, this is all we got. I'm just trying to get into the mindset of these disciples. Jesus has thrown them a challenge. You feed them. And they got 5 loaves and 2 little fish. And they're saying, here what we got. And so Jesus says, well, tell them to all sit down in groups. And obviously they were probably all sitting up. In another place it says it was a grassy area evidently. And he set them in 50s and 100s. In other words, he set them in groups, if you will, of 50s and 100s. And then what does he do next? He prays to God. This to me is significant. Where did Jesus know his power came from? God. And he prayed first, and then he gave them the food. He prays first and then gave them the food. Do you think this is where our tradition of praying before a meal came from? Or maybe it came from the Lord's Supper? It's interesting. When did we start a tradition of praying for a meal? Before a meal? We don't know when it started, but I wonder if some of this teaching comes from that, because we have 2 instances here where Jesus, before they ate, he looks up to God and prays, and obviously there's going to be a miracle performed. I think that's part of this prayer to God. But also, when he gave the disciples the Lord's Supper, what did he do then? He prayed before they took of it. So I think from that we now have this tradition of praying before we eat, and it's a good tradition. I think it is. When all of our families together, we usually get one of the kids to pray. And boy, they can have some good ones. Or they can say, thank you for the food, amen, let's eat. But that's all right. It's coming from where they are. But it's this thought process of praying it's an acknowledgement of where this came from. I think that's what it is. There's an knowledge of where this came from.
Can you imagine how long it took to feed 5,000 men, not counting the women and the children?
It had to take a while,
Oh, a long time.
but yeah.
I don't think, I think this is the only miracle that's recorded in all four gospels.
Yeah,
And I don't think in any of the recordings, nobody complained.
yeah,
There were leftovers, correct?
yeah,
But nobody complained about what they were fed.
yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, so Tanya makes point, this is the only miracle that's in all four gospels. And nobody complained about what they had to eat. You're feeding people bread and fish, is somebody likely going to complain?
And years ago, you didn't complain about what you.
You just ate it, didn't you? Yeah. So they had, obviously they had food, there were no complaints. And not only did they feed them with this, but they brought back 12 baskets. We don't know how big this basket was. 12 baskets of fragments.
Wonder where they got the baskets.
That's a good question. It doesn't tell us. Somebody has some basket somewhere. But they bring it back, and you think about, so I still truly believe that a lot of these miracles he did were for his disciples. Now, you got 5,000 people there. Do all of them know where this food came from? Do they know Jesus performed this miracle necessarily?
They saw it.
Probably some people did, but you figure, if I was standing here in front of our church building and you put 5,000 people in that field across from here in 50s and 100s, how far away are they going to be? Yeah. So, some of them probably knew that he performed this miracle. They knew he gave them the food, obviously. But I think a lot of these miracles were done for his disciples. Because here he challenges them, number one, you feed them. And they said, we've only got these 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and now he prays to God, and now they feed everybody, and then pick up all these fragments. And I think there's another lesson there. There was nothing wasted. John's account says, when he wrote about it, he said they took them up that none would be wasted. So they didn't waste the food. And so he fed 5,000 plus with this. We read that. That's amazing, isn't it? And everybody ate all they wanted. It's you think about how much food it would take to feed 5,000 plus women and children. We don't know exactly the whole total, how much it would have taken, but he does that. He feeds them all, fragments are left over, and can you imagine what his disciples are thinking right now? Not only is he healing people, he can produce food out of air. And so it's an amazing miracle.
Don't you think it showed both his compassion spiritually and physically?
Yeah, that's a good
There are
point.
both sides of it.
Yeah, it shows his compassion spiritually for them, but also physically for them. Number one, he healed them, and now he's feeding them. And the fact that he knew they were going to be hungry, and they couldn't get there and back. And so he feeds them. So a lot of great lessons here. I think it's interesting when we think about him feeding them. I think, can we really fathom how this could have happened? I mean, if you really is true, how it could have happened. So you couldn't take 5 loaves and 2 fishes and feed my family. During the holidays, it'd been like, where's the rest of the food? And so he feeds all these people. A great, great miracle here. So next week, we'll start there at verse 22.